Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's virtual open house. My name is Dugan Becker. I am a communications assistant with Mayflower Wind, and I will be the moderator of tonight's event. First and foremost, I'd just like to thank you all for taking the time out of your evening to join us tonight to learn a little bit more about the Mayflower Wind project and our efforts in the region. The topic of tonight's session is Mayflower Wind's economic development investments in the SouthCoast region. This is the second event in our open house series titled The Future of Clean Energy is Here. If you have any interest in watching a recording of our first open house from this past May, you can do so on our website, mayflowerwind.com, on the events page under past events. We had over 600 registrants for tonight's event, so we're both really excited and grateful for such a strong turnout. Specifically, I'd like to give a special thanks to the legislators and local leaders in attendance, as well as representatives from our partner organizations for joining us tonight. So just to quickly go over tonight's agenda, following these opening remarks, we will give an overview of the Mayflower Wind project, followed by a summary of our SouthCoast economic development investments, touching on topics such as supply chain opportunities, offshore wind education, training, and workforce development, DEI initiatives, investments in research and innovation, investments in ports and supporting infrastructure, and support for low-income ratepayers. The presentation will conclude with an overview of the next steps for the Mayflower Wind project, at which point we will transition into the Q&A portion of the event. Please feel free to submit your questions at any time during the presentation using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your Zoom window. Just as a reminder, the topic of tonight's event is economic development on the South Coast, and we request that you please stick to that topic when drafting your questions. Now, please allow me to introduce your speakers for this evening. We have Chris Hardy, Mayflower's External Outreach Manager, Kelsey Perry, our Community Liaison Officer, Will Cotta, our Supply Chain Manager, and myself, Dugan Becker, Mayflower's Communications Assistant. Now I will pass it over to our first speaker for this evening, Chris Hardy, to give you a project overview. Chris.
Thank you, Dugan. I'm Chris Hardy, the External Outreach Manager for the Mayflower Wind project. Thank you very much for attending tonight. Mayflower Wind is a 50-50 joint venture between Shell and Ocean Winds. Before turning over to the main feature of tonight's presentation on the South Coast Economic Development Incentives, I want to give a brief overview of the project. So let's start at the beginning. Our region, our world, our states are all in a great transition to a net carbon future, where the economic and social benefits of all these new clean energy investments are diffused to historically disadvantaged and diverse populations. New electric generation is needed to accommodate the move towards electrification of our heating and our transportation sectors, while supplementing the fossil fuel and nuclear power plants that have been retired across our region. I know many people here tonight are from the Salem area or the Brayton Point area. Those communities know all too well the legacy of some of those plants, but also the opportunity that has been afforded as a result of the most recent bid opportunities in Massachusetts to revitalize those sites. And Massachusetts leaders have stepped up and recognized the need to meet rising energy demand while tackling climate change. They've established a statewide limit of net zero emissions by 2050, and they've also charted a roadmap to decarbonization in Massachusetts. To this end, the Commonwealth has issued 3 rounds of procurement for 3,200 megawatts of offshore wind. Mayflower Wind has received 1,200 of those megawatts, making the Mayflower Wind project one of the single largest contributors to Massachusetts' net zero carbon emissions goal. The decarbonization roadmap calls for about another 1,000 to 2,000 megawatts of new offshore wind generation each year to meet that 2050 target. Now, beyond eliminating harmful greenhouse gas emissions, wind power makes sense for consumers. It helps stabilize our electric rates, particularly in these cold winter months, as we've experienced most recently in the past week, and dare I say, as we're about to experience this weekend. Now, the strong and consistent wind speeds that are found in these federal offshore wind lease areas generate significant energy during all seasons of the year, but most particularly in the cold winter months when natural gas prices surge from heating demand. And during that peak winter demand, the wind power that projects like Mayflower are delivering will help offset the need for oil, natural gas, coal power plants that are brought online to meet that unexpected surge in demand, particularly among the southeastern Massachusetts and the Cape Cod load zone. Now, by pursuing two delivery options, one to Brayton Point, about 95 miles away from the lease area, and another from Falmouth, which is about 45 miles away from the lease area, Mayflower Wind can maximize the total generation capacity of our 127,000 acre lease area. Mayflower Wind currently won, as I just mentioned, 1,200 megawatts in 2 rounds of procurement led by the Commonwealth, and will devote that to delivering to Brayton Point. Now, I know many of you are here tonight from Falmouth, and we've spoken to many of you in the past, and we look forward to speaking to you again in the coming months to address some of the routing issues and concerns that many people have. We also know that many people in the South Coast and in Portsmouth and Brayton Point have questions about the nature of our footprint in your community. We promise to you that we'll be holding future open houses in the coming weeks to address those concerns. But given the limited amount of time we have tonight, we wanted to focus on the important economic development and investments that will be brought to the South Coast. So now, wait a minute, Chris, you're telling me, where is this offshore wind located and how does this power get to my home? Let's start out in the federal waters, in the outer continental shelf, where in our lease area, again, of about 127,000 acres, there'll be 147 wind turbines spaced out. Those wind turbines generate kinetic energy from the wind that is converted into electric and then conveyed via a series of cables to an offshore high voltage direct current converter station. Mayflower Wind is utilizing direct current technology to deliver power to Brayton Point because it's the most efficient way to deliver large amounts of power while minimizing losses and minimizing the amount of cabling needed. I'm sorry, could you go back to that previous slide? I'm sorry, yes. So once the power is brought to the converter station, its endpoint is an onshore converter station in Somerset. But along the way, the cable will first make an intermediate landfall underneath Aquidneck Island, and then jumping back into Mount Hope Bay, continuing buried underneath the seafloor until it gets to Brayton Point. There, a short cable will be made to a new converter station that will convert the power from direct current to alternating current so that it can be used in our homes. A short cable will then be connected to an existing onshore substation that is a legacy of the Brayton Point coal plant past. And then ultimately that power connected to a system of transmission and distribution lines that ultimately bring power to you. Now, the base of our activity can be found in Fall River in New Bedford. The project will be utilizing the New Bedford Marine Commerce Terminal as the primary staging place to bring equipment during the construction and installation process. At the same time, Mayflower Wind will be building a new operations and maintenance port on the Fall River waterfront. Now, over 300 employees during the operations maintenance phase will be based at this station in Fall River, most of them making their way regularly out to the wind farm, though some may be going back and forth between Fall River and New Bedford, where crew transfer vessels will also take the workers out to conduct important work in maintaining the infrastructure at sea. Now, certainly, as I've said, Mayflower will generate a significant amount of long-term investment in jobs and economic development in the South Coast. To find out more about this in detail, I want to introduce my friends and colleagues, Kelsey Perry and Will Cotta. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Chris. That was a great overview. And now I'll go into some more detail about Mayflower Wind's economic development investments that are being made on the South Coast. So first and foremost, we are committed to investing in local communities that we're in by building responsible partnerships, supporting economic development, utilizing local resources, and providing jobs. Mayflower Wind is committed to investing over $115 million in initiatives that will help make the Commonwealth and the South Coast region in particular, a hub for offshore wind activities. Our investments range from supply chain opportunities, workforce training and education, low-income ratepayer support, port development, applied research, and with diversity, equity, and inclusion really being at the core of all of these initiatives. Of the $115 million investment, $77 million was offered under our first offshore wind procurement from Massachusetts, and $42 million has been offered through the recent solicitation and Mayflower Wind's award of 400 additional megawatts, as Chris just mentioned. Here are our partner organizations that we've been working with on these initiatives. We're grateful for all of their support and collaboration that they've offered us over the past months and some now years. Thank you very much again for the representatives from our partner organizations who are here with us tonight. Your support is always very much appreciated. And we recognize that crafting a local and diverse offshore wind industry does not happen with only our efforts. And now I can go into some further detail about all of these specific partnerships. So education, training, and workforce development. Our goal at Mayflower is to train local workers at every level in order to shape tomorrow's offshore wind industry. So first, $5 million will be distributed through the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center towards workforce development with a safety emphasis. These funds were part of our 2020 solicitation award package from the Commonwealth. As part of our recent economic development package, we've created the Mayflower Fund with the South Coast Community Foundation. This $27 million donor advised fund will be supported by key Massachusetts voices and institutions from across the region over the next 10 years. These funds are going to be used to build inclusive, equitable, and diverse employment, training, and supply chain opportunities, all related to the offshore wind industry on the southeastern Massachusetts region. The fund will not only have a huge impact on its own, but it will also leverage and boost federal, state, and municipal economic development efforts that are already in motion. Additionally, we've partnered with Bristol Community College and will provide $6 million to support their National Offshore Wind Institute. These funds will support the organization along with their offshore wind diversity program and other related offshore wind programs that are well underway. Last, but of course not least, we've also partnered with the Massachusetts Maritime Academy and will be providing $2 million for scholarships for cadets who are first-generation students in southeastern Massachusetts. These funds will continue to boost the education and training efforts that are already underway in the Commonwealth and will encourage new entrepreneurial ideas for offshore wind workforce development moving forward. Now moving on to supply chain opportunities and investments. We are lucky to have Will Cotta with us here tonight, Mayflower Wind Supply Chain Manager. So I will go ahead and hand it to Will.
Thanks, Kelsey. My role on the Mayflower team is to work with our technical and procurement teams to help implement these economic development packages. And we're looking to implement them in Massachusetts, but with a specific focus on the South Coast. So throughout the life of the project, the services and products that Mayflower needs kind of change and develop. So right now we're in the permitting and development phase, and this really focuses on the engineering and design required to help us build our project and get the permits we need to start construction. From there, we move into construction, where we'll have the highest spending throughout the life of the project across a few packages. Our construction port is New Bedford at the New Bedford Marine Commerce Terminal. So there's a lot of opportunities for local businesses, and we'll work with the contractors that we put out for the main packages to find opportunities to work with local and diverse businesses. Finally, there's operations and maintenance. These are the long-term jobs and opportunities and the relationships that we'll develop with businesses throughout the community to support the safe operation of our wind farm and optimize electrical generation from it. Most of that centers around inspection. We can go to the next slide. This industry is very complex in kind of all the different elements that need to be put together. And so we often use what's called a tiered contracting structure. So each of those main packages that were listed earlier, each one of them will have a main contractor and then a lot of subcontractors working on them. But each company is vital to the success of the project. So looking at the turbine installation package, we might go out and hand out a contract for turbine installation, But then that contractor is going to go out and look for port facilities. They're going to look for an installation vessel. They're going to need crews. And then once they have all that in place, they'll need those ancillary services that support the actual operation and construction of that package. So that's fuel, that's food and supplies, it's training, it's safety equipment. And all of these services are already offered throughout the South Coast. So even if you don't do anything specifically in offshore wind today, there's probably still opportunities for you in this industry. If we can go to the next slide. One of the key partnerships and local businesses that we already have that I'm really excited about is our partnership with Gladding Hearn. Gladding Hearn is a shipyard in Somerset, right across the river from our office in Fall River. And we've partnered with them to build our crew transfer vessel that'll operate out of New Bedford. This vessel is going to use hybrid technology, and it's going to have batteries and diesel to really provide us fuel savings, but more importantly for the community, reduce the emissions from the vessel. So this is just one example early on that we have of a great local business with really a national reputation for building outstanding vessels that's right in our backyard. We're looking forward for other opportunities to work with local companies. And I think Duke is going to share, once we get to the question and answer, our registration page as well. And I encourage you to sign up for that. As we find those opportunities, we'll share them with you. I'll hand it back to Kelsey.
Great. Thanks, Will. That was a great overview of all the supply chain opportunities. And now I'm going to highlight some of our partnerships that are specifically focused on diversifying the offshore wind workforce. We're committed at Mayflower Wind to ensuring that these investments flow to the benefit of the local communities, including women, Black, Indigenous, people of color, veterans, and low-income populations. We've partnered with the Mass Hire Greater New Bedford Workforce Board to support the placement of Massachusetts veterans in offshore wind-focused jobs. We look forward to working with them and veteran agents in the region to ensure that we're utilizing the valuable skills that veterans hold. We're also working with RPS. RPS is a scientific technical consultancy that employs more than 5,000 people in trades in the United States. In the field of marine in-field environmental monitoring and industry and academic programs, RPS is the single largest provider of protected species observers in the United States. Mayflower Wind employs protected species observers on all geophysical survey vessels who are responsible for keeping watch over a monitoring zone around the vessel to identify any protected species, including marine mammals and sea turtles. So Mayflower Wind and RPS are working together to create a unique program that will offer local Native Americans cost-free training and all certifications required to work as protected species observers in the offshore wind industry. We've also partnered with the National Society of Black Engineers, Boston Professionals, to provide the opportunity for 2 full-time rotational jobs and 2 internships for National Society of Black Engineer college students. We're committed to developing a program with the National Society of Black Engineers to engage their network about offshore wind, and we'll work with them on outreach initiatives. Lastly, we've provided $100,000 to the SouthCoast LGBTQ+ network to support their new community center in New Bedford, which in the future could very well be a classroom space for job and employment training related to offshore wind. Now to research and innovation, another really important topic. Again, through our 2020 award package, $25 million will be distributed through the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center to support fueling practical research by local institutions, innovation in the offshore wind industry in Massachusetts, and direct support for marine science. We're looking forward to fueling the institutions around us that are already really well positioned to provide this innovation that the industry needs. We're lucky that Mayflower Wind's activities are planned to be based in communities that already have a very strong scientific culture. For example, our landfall in Falmouth and the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution that's located right next door. We're also partners with the New England Aquarium. The Inspire Environmental Partnership with the New England Aquarium funds research to study the movements of highly migratory fish in and around Mayflower Wind's federal offshore wind lease area, as well as the recreational fisheries for these species. Ports and infrastructure. Will hit on this a little bit, but investing in the ports and coastal infrastructure on the South Coast is really what's going to build the foundation for the offshore wind industry. We're committed to investing $35 million towards ports and infrastructure, including $7.5 million for operations and maintenance port upgrades specifically. Mayflower Wind will establish its operations and maintenance port in Fall River at the Boarding and Remington complex, as Chris mentioned. We intend to redevelop these 6 acres of land on the Fall River waterfront to accommodate and support our continuous operations. Once the project is in operations, the operations and maintenance port will create about 360 permanent, high quality, long-term jobs that will operate and maintain the wind farm. And again, as Will highlighted, Mayflower Wind has signed a lease agreement to utilize the New Bedford Marine Commerce Terminal as its primary staging and deployment base for construction and installation of our offshore wind project. The terminal is actually the first in North America, specifically purpose-built to support the staging and installation of offshore wind components. Low-income ratepayer support, another really important initiative that we want to hit on. So first, I just want to note that the Massachusetts Department of Energy Resources has predicted that the Mayflower Wind project will save ratepayers about $2 billion over the life of the project by delivering its low-cost clean energy. So on top of these savings, we've also committed $5 million over 10 years to the Cape Light Compact for initiatives that optimize customers' energy usage and lower electric bills for low-income households. On the South Coast, we've partnered with the Buzzards Bay Habitat for Humanity. As an initial element of this effort, we've contributed $50,000 towards the construction of a 2-family house in Westport. We're really looking forward to a Mayflower staff volunteer day this spring to help finish the construction of that home. And from here, our partnership will continue to grow. So Mayflower will provide $2.5 million to support their nonprofit mission to build fully electrified homes for families on the South Coast. We aim to invest in dozens of homes over the next decade that will deliver substantial energy savings and assist the area's low-income residents. So that was our overview of our economic development investments. I'm really excited that I got to deliver that to the audience tonight. And another frequent question is, what's next for Mayflower Wind? What's next for our project? So just to start from the beginning, to give you an idea of where we are now on our timeline, we were successful, we were awarded our offshore federal lease area in 2019. As mentioned previously, we were successful in 2020 in entering into a power purchase agreement with various Massachusetts utilities for 800 megawatts, which is about enough clean energy to power over 500,000 homes. And in December, we were awarded our additional 400 megawatts from the Commonwealth that further boosts our contribution to the decarbonization of Massachusetts and our economic development investments. We submitted our construction operations plan to the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management in November of 2021, and now BOEM, or the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, is working to prepare Mayflower's draft environmental impact statement. Over the coming year, we will be continuing through these federal, state, and local permitting processes. The permitting and regulatory review processes do include formal public meetings and public comment periods to allow all interested community members to share information and submit feedback about our project. And we definitely encourage public participation. Public participation in offshore wind development is absolutely critical, and we'll keep all residents and businesses informed about our efforts. And after the construction in the mid-2020s, we hope to deliver this clean energy by the end of this decade. And now I can go ahead and hand it back to my colleague, Dugan.
Great. Thank you very much, Kelsey. That was great. And so that concludes the presentation portion of this event. Before we move on to Q&A, we do have a short video we would like to share with you all.
Offshore wind represents a huge opportunity. Mayflower continues to engage with the local communities in order to ensure that we have the best possible working relationship with those communities. We aim to bring sustainable jobs and training to the workforce in the South Coast.
Mayflower's commitment of investing in economic incentives and investments throughout the South Coast is a real game changer. It proves that Mayflower is sincerely committed to the region, not just in words, but in action.
The benefits for this region of offshore wind are significant. This region cares about things like climate change. We also care about building homegrown and local economic opportunity.
People are seeing Mayflower establish offices in Fall River, knowing that there will be a presence in New Bedford for training. People are saying, yeah, this is really coming to our area. I'm excited about this. I want to be a part of this.
There's going to be job creation up and down the spectrum. From those technicians and mechanics that are going to be working directly in installing the turbines, to those that are going to be maintaining those turbines, to the whole supply chain.
This is an opportunity for the South Coast to really flourish, and there are so many incredible needs, not the least of which is building a workforce that is appropriate and talented and ready to do this work.
We want to show people in this region that Mayflower is supporting the development of this community.
The idea is we listen, we engage, and ultimately we can find a way to make investments in the South Coast which work for the people of the South Coast and for Mayflower and ultimately benefit together.
We're going to open the floor up to questions. So just a reminder that you can submit your questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and to please try to keep your questions relevant to the topic of today's event. So our first question here is for Kelsey. Will preference be given to local workers and businesses when hiring for the project's construction phase? How about the operations and maintenance phase? Kelsey?
Great, thanks, Dugan. Sorry about that. That's a great question. So yes, preference will definitely be given to local workers. At least 75% of our operations and maintenance jobs will be locally based. Mayflower Service Operation Vessel, or SOV, is going to dock at our Fall River O&M port. Our crew transfer vessels, or CTVs, will run out of New Bedford and be running back and forth. And this is going to create a cluster of new jobs and activity on the South Coast for both the construction and operations phase.
Excellent. Thank you, Kelsey. So our next question here is for Chris. Actually, a couple of people submitted the same question, so I think it must be the cold weather that we've been getting recently. But people are curious to hear if cold weather like this and severe storms as well have an impact on the turbines.
Thank you very much for your question. And it's certainly timely given the expected winds and snowfall that we're going to experience this coming weekend. And as a matter of fact, Mayflower Wind has a vessel that's out in the federal offshore wind lease area right now conducting surveys. I'm not sure how many of us would be hardy enough to actually want to do that type of work in these type of conditions. But that's one of the things that is remarkable about these particular federal offshore wind lease areas located off of New England. The strong and consistent wind speeds that spread across all of the lease areas, not just Mayflower Wind's lease area, generate significant energy consistently throughout the year, but most particularly during weekends like this and some of the most recent weeks. Those of us who live by the ocean can certainly understand when your the windows start to rattle. That is probably a good sign for me in my employment of what's going on deeper out in the water. And that is important because it helps offset the fluctuations in fossil fuel prices, such as natural gas, for which our region is highly overdependent as an energy resource. And by complementing them and balancing them out, we end up with significant savings for consumers. The Massachusetts Department of Energy Resources has calculated this project will generate over $2 billion in savings to customers. And that is because of the nature of the wind speeds and the reliability. Thank you.
And if I can just add one thing, I'll say the turbine suppliers offer winterization packages. So they add a little heater that keeps the oil warm. And we haven't secured a turbine supplier yet, but I know our team is most likely going to get the winterization package. So
Right. Well put. Well, thank you. Great. So this next question is for Kelsey. How many jobs will the Mayflower project create?
Sure. Thanks, Dugan. So over the life of the project, the Mayflower Wind project will create over 14,000 jobs, and that's across all phases of development, like Will mentioned. So across permitting and development, construction, operations, and maintenance, it's over 14,000 jobs.
Thank you. Okay, here's one for Will. So earlier you mentioned the crew transfer vessel. Can you speak to that a little bit? And what's going on, how many we're building, that kind of thing.
Yeah, so right now we have an agreement for one with Gladding Hearn, who's over in Somerset, and they're a great shipyard. They've produced a ton of vessels similar to these, but never specifically like this. And one of the pieces of technology that I'm particularly excited about is the hybrid technology with the batteries that'll help reduce emissions. So yeah, right now I believe the partnership's only for one, but as needs evolve, that could grow.
Thank you, Will. Okay, let's see here. Here's another one for Will. There were a couple of questions about that tiered graphic that you showed. Specifically, how can these lower tier suppliers, tier 3 suppliers, catch the attention of the contract holder, so the tier 1 vendors and whatnot?
Yeah, so I think number one is, if you're local, we have an office in Fall River. Spent a lot of time in New Bedford. I think Kelsey and I are going down to the Mass Hire office tomorrow in New Bedford. So if you're local, it's easier to get our attention. I'll just say that. The other way is we're going to do, once we have preferred suppliers in place, we're still in the process of selecting those, but we'll do meet the buyer events to actually make those introductions with companies, with those suppliers who are going to be specifically working on our project. We have our supply chain registration, and we're taking that data now. Where we find opportunities for companies through permitting development, we make those connections, but a lot of those opportunities are going to come through the construction phase. And so, yeah, those meet the buyer events are going to be crucial. And we'll follow up with more information when those are closer.
Yeah, and just so everybody knows, I went ahead and put our supplier registry link in the chat. So if you are a supplier or a local business that's interested in potentially working with us in the future, I highly encourage you to go and fill out your information on that. Great. Here's another one for Chris. How much electricity will be generated by the project?
Thank you. The federal offshore lease area, 127,000 acres, has the capacity to generate over 2,400 megawatts of low-cost clean energy, depending on the type of technologies that we use. And we estimate that we have 147 wind turbines positioned in that offshore wind lease area. I'm sorry, what was the rest of your question?
I think that was it. It was just how much electricity will be produced by the project.
Oh, how much electricity? I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. I apologize. Yes, so 2,400 megawatts. So the math of it is actually fairly simple. So Mayflower Wind won 2 rounds of procurement, totaling 1,200 megawatts, which happens to be about half of the lease area capacity. And so we will deliver that 1,200 megawatts to Brayton Point, and then the other 1,200 megawatts to Falmouth. And that 1,200 megawatts, as Kelsey had mentioned in one of the slides, is roughly equivalent to enough energy to supply 800,000 homes. So all told, this federal lease area will exceed 1 million homes served with low-cost clean energy.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. Here's another one for Kelsey. Could you please explain the difference between Mayflower Wind, Vineyard Wind, and Commonwealth Wind? Are they all the same? And who's doing what?
Sure. Yeah, I know this can be a little bit confusing. There are actually some maps online that kind of show the differences between the lease areas, south of the islands. So Mayflower Wind and Vineyard Wind are different companies. Mayflower Wind is a joint venture between Shell and Ocean Winds. And then Vineyard Wind is, as I said, its own company, and Commonwealth Wind is one of Vineyard Wind's projects. So if you can find the map, maybe we can, put that on our website for people's ease, but it is available online. You can see how the lease areas are broken up into these different projects. Like Chris was just saying, right now we have 1,200 megawatts procured with the Commonwealth. So right now about half of our lease area is taken up, and we have one project going to Brayton Point and one project going to Falmouth. Vineyard Wind is very similar. They have different projects that are going to different points of interconnection. So, you know, Mayflower, Vineyard, separate companies, and we have different things going on underneath our separate umbrellas.
Thank you, Kelsey. Okay, here's somewhat of a technical one for Chris, so it might be a little bit outside the scope for today's meeting, but it's still, you know, a good question. Somebody asking you to talk a little bit more about how these cables make landfall, specifically the horizontal directional drilling process.
Oh, great. Well, thank you. Yes, the project will be utilizing horizontal directional drilling, which is an innovative and preferred method of tunneling cable underground. By utilizing certain cable laying vessels, they were able to drill and utilizing actually the same techniques used in oil and gas industry, buried pipelines, deep below, and avoid the nearshore areas where there's sensitive resources like eelgrass and other things. By avoiding that directly, by going so far below and then back up and then staying underground, it's important to remember that the cables utilized in this project will be completely underground. And the only thing that anyone will see are manhole covers on the surface to enable the workers to go underneath and conduct their inspections and various maintenance. But the horizontal directional drilling, you know, is sort of shaped almost like a U as it starts out in the offshore lease area, comes back up under the ground, and then the cables themselves will continue from a conduit that is installed just north of the beach area itself, so that we avoid any impacts itself to the beach. And again, the only thing that anyone would see on the surface from this project are manhole covers, as the cables themselves will be completely buried underground. Now, of course, there will be substation where the cables connect, and that is above ground and visible. But in the case of Falmouth, that substation will be further upland, away from the beach area. And then, of course, as I mentioned with Brayton Point, there'll be a small footprint at the Brayton Point former coal plant site, where an onshore converter station will be located that is next to the existing substation that was part of that coal plant. So we're utilizing the existing infrastructure there really with a very small footprint.
Thank you, Chris. Here's one for Kelsey. Will MassHire's Fall River office be involved in providing employment notices? I don't know if you know anything about that.
I am not sure. I'm not sure if Will, if you have anything.
I'll say we're meeting with MassHire New Bedford. Our partnership through the economic development packages with MassHire New Bedford. In our first conversation, they had great things to say about MassHire Fall River. And so we'll find out more tomorrow when we go and meet with them.
Yeah, I mean, send us an email. We'd love to connect.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, and here's another one for Chris. So you mentioned our 1,200 megawatt procurement so far. Roughly how many homes does that power?
Sure, 1,200 megawatts roughly provides enough power to supply over 800,000 homes and businesses in Massachusetts.
Okay, let's see here. Okay, so I think this one would either be for Kelsey or Will. Feel free, either one of you, to grab it. How many permanent jobs will there be in the operation and maintenance phase?
So I don't know the exact number. I might defer to Kelsey on this. And I think it's somewhat dependent on the suppliers we work with. They'll really help determine the needs for specifically how many jobs we want. I will say we've committed to 75% of those jobs being local, and putting our operations and maintenance base in Fall River is a great step towards achieving that, because that's where people are going to work out of. So don't have the exact number. Kelsey might have the estimate that we have from our consultants, but 75% of whatever that number is guaranteed to be local.
Yeah, I don't have the exact breakdown of the numbers, but as I mentioned, all of the phases will create over 14,000 jobs. The least amount of jobs are right now during the development and permitting phase, and then there will be the peak of jobs during the construction phase, but those jobs are more short term. So then during the operations and maintenance phase, those job numbers will decrease, but as we mentioned during the presentation, those will be permanent, long-term, high-quality jobs at that point.
Thank you. Okay, let's see here. Here's another one for Kelsey. Could you speak a little bit about how we've engaged with Bristol Community College so far?
Sure. We have a great partnership with Bristol Community College and their National Offshore Wind Institute. As I mentioned, we are committing $6 million to support NOWI, or the National Offshore Wind Institute, over the next 10 years. As you saw in the video, Laura Douglas took part in our video, and we're looking forward to continuing the relationship with Bristol Community College. We try to keep them up to date on events like this, and we'll continue to try to host office hours events, which some of you may have heard of. We had a workforce and education office hours back in December, where we, communicated with Bristol Community College about that. And we're hoping to have more events on campuses like Bristol Community College to engage with more students about the opportunities for their future career. So we love Bristol Community College. We love the National Offshore Wind Institute and have really high hopes for what they're going to become, and look forward to continuing to work with them over the next decade.
Thank you very much. Okay, this next one's for Will. Besides New Bedford, is Mayflower Wind considering any other ports during the construction phase?
Right now we have a contract with New Bedford, and so that's really what we need to build the project. I'm not aware of any other search for ports or anything like that, but yeah, New Bedford, it's a great facility there. Mass DEC worked with state to develop it, and there's a great resource around there for a lot of local companies in the maritime industry. And NOWI is right down the street, which is great.
Thanks, Will. Okay, here's one for Chris. Could you speak a little bit about why 2 landfall locations are necessary as opposed to just 1?
Sure. Well, thank you very much. Well, Southern New England exists out at the outer periphery of the regional transmission network. And so when we start with this project, we start by looking at where is it feasible for us to inject the power into the regional grid. And so by virtue of an exhaustive search that looked over 10 different grid interconnection points, we identified Brayton Point and Falmouth as the most optimal places for delivering power to the grid. The reality is that there simply isn't enough existing places in the Southeast to bring all this power ashore. And future policymakers, as well as the regional grid operator, will need to take a closer look and a hard look at making continued upgrades to enable us to tap into all the potential that we have. Now, ISO New England, I mentioned, is the grid operator. And so our project must go through the review conducted by ISO New England to determine the reliability of the project, to ensure that the system overall is maintained. And ISO New England has a policy standard that effectively limits a single project and a single interconnection to about 1,200 megawatts. And so that's how we were able to basically break the lease area, if you will, into 2 and deliver 1,200 to Brayton Point and 1,200 to Falmouth.
Great, thank you very much, Chris. Okay, here's a good one. And this could either be, Kelsey or Will, maybe you can each take a stab at it. The question is, do I need to climb turbines to work in offshore wind? Thankfully not, or else I wouldn't be here. I'm personally afraid of heights, but maybe Kelsey, you could talk about that, or maybe give some other, talk about some of the other job opportunities.
Yeah, I can take a stab at it first, and then Will, if you have anything to add. So the answer is definitely no. None of us here climb wind turbines, but I know that question gets a bit different as we get into construction operations. The Offshore Wind Workforce Training and Development in Massachusetts 2021 report actually identified 119 distinct occupations across all phases. If you do happen to have an adventurous spirit, there will be many wind turbine technician positions available in the coming years, of course. It's actually the 2nd fastest growing occupation in the United States. The New Bedford Light just put out a really good article on it. I think it's called So You Want to Be a Wind Turbine Tech. So you could read that article to learn more if you did want to explore that occupation. But as Will pointed out earlier in the presentation, the offshore wind industry is multifaceted, and we need lots of people with different skills to offer in order to stand it up. Many of the jobs are going to be land-based. You're not going to have to always go to sea in order to do this work. Some examples might be research assistants, purchasing agents, engineers, onshore construction, apprentices, communication specialists, food and hospitality workers, the list really goes on. And all of these hands are needed in order to hold up and start up this emerging industry.
Yeah, I would just encourage people to look at the partnerships we have and where those investments are made into jobs. And so we have the National Offshore Wind Institute, and that's great. And they're going to be the ones who help train people who are climbing turbines. We also have a partnership with Mass Maritime. We're building 2 vessels, and so people are going to be on those vessels to operate them. We have this partnership with the National Society of Black Engineers. So if you want to be an engineer and do that design work, that's an opportunity. The partnership we have with RPS is Protect Species Observers. And so people working on vessels to really understand biology and what different whales look like and make sure those species are protected. There's probably more that I can go through. Oh, the Gladding Hearn, if you want to be a welder, you want to build ships, that's a great partnership for us. And so I think one of the things that I'm really excited about with the economic development package we have is we have money through the South Coast Community Foundation to be opportunistic and find opportunities that we don't necessarily see right now, and let the community tell us where those opportunities for jobs are. But we also have clear and very specific commitments with organizations that are already working throughout Massachusetts and the South Coast to build those jobs and help train that future workforce. So yeah, I encourage people to look at the partnerships. And then one last plug I'll throw out. I know Mass DEC is coming out with a solicitation for workforce development grants that go out to them. They had a whole slew of grants that went out to the offshore wind industry last year, and they have another one just coming out, solicitation. And so that's another one. If you have a great idea, we'll have packages rolling out as well. But that's one in the real near term that if you have a great idea, you should bring it to them, and hopefully we'll help support that as well.
Yeah.
The other thing I just wanted to add that Mayflower Wind and Vineyard Wind each cost shared the 2020 grants that went out to a variety of providers in workforce development, including Mass Maritime and Bristol Community College, as well as several others. So we definitely cheered on the students and practitioners who participated in those classes and are really excited to see their continued success.
Yeah, and I just want to add one more thing since you mentioned Mass CEC. If you're a student and you're not really sure where to start, since there's so many different occupations and ways to get your foot in the door, Mass CEC has a great resource. It's called cleanenergyeducation.org, and it has lists of different jobs during the different phases. So I would just recommend going to that website if you need a place to start.
Excellent, thanks. It was great that everybody chimed in on that one. It was a really good question. So here's one for Chris, and this is kind of a more technical question, but do you plan on leasing or purchasing the property you need at Brayton Point? And if anybody else wants to chime in, feel free.
That's a good question. Right now we're just looking at an easement to allow the electric cable to be buried underneath. And then, the exact form of the real estate agreement, we're still sort of working out with the current landlord or landowner at Brayton Point. And it's an exciting rejuvenation in conjunction with the Commonwealth Wind Project proposed location of a manufacturing plant at the Brayton Point site, along with our relatively small footprint at the site, which will consist of really just the electric cable, our converter station, and then the tie-in to the existing onshore substation. So, I think it's a great example. Someone had asked earlier, I think, about how our companies sort of work together, and we are competitors. We have different objectives, and we represent different, corporate leaders and the like. But at times, and crucial times like that, we help collaborate and bring together really what is the ultimate power and in the form of new investments in clean energy and the revitalization of former sites like Brayton Point and like Salem as far as the future of the Commonwealth.
Okay, and as we approach the end of the hour here, we have time for one more question. And this is actually a question that we got a couple of times tonight. Maybe Kelsey, you can speak to this one. Could you talk to us a little bit about the different institutions and organizations in the region that are providing workforce training opportunities around offshore wind?
Sure. So there are actually 45 wind training educational programs that operate in the Northeast of the United States. This is both onshore and offshore wind, but 14 of those host specific curricula that's offshore wind related, and another 15 are in development. Massachusetts is the home to many of these programs. We're really lucky to be here if you want to get involved in offshore wind. Some examples are UMass Amherst Offshore Wind Certificate Program, Tufts University has a program, UMass Dartmouth, Lowell, Boston, Massachusetts Maritime Academy, Cape Cod Community College, of course, the National Offshore Wind Institute with Bristol Community College, and there are a few others. So there are lots of opportunities to get some education and training related to offshore wind in Massachusetts.
Great, thank you very much, Kelsey. Okay, and with that, we are just about out of time. My apologies if we didn't get to your question. Please feel free to reach out to us with any follow-up questions you might have at the email address on screen here, info@mayflowerwind.com, or feel free to call this phone number, and we can definitely follow up with you at a later time and answer any remaining questions that you may have. We'd also like to urge you to follow us on our social media pages displayed here, as well as subscribe to our newsletter. It's really the best way to stay informed about both project updates and future events like this. And then lastly, as I mentioned, we encourage you to visit our website as well. It's updated really regularly. So again, a great resource in terms of staying updated on project ongoings and whatnot. And it's also translatable into 12 different languages. So if you know anybody that is interested in that, maybe speaks a different language, there's a good chance that it would be accessible to them as well. So with that, from all of us at Mayflower Wind, we would just like to thank you once again for joining us tonight, and we hope to see you all again soon.